Okay. So once again, folks, thanks for coming along. My name is Gary Ryan. I'm from Organisations That Matter. Back in 1994, my very first full-time job was with Monsu Caulfield. So it's a delight to be able to come and do some work with you. I work in the high performance culture space. I do executive coaching. My current clients include Monsu Caulfield, Monash University, Melbourne University, Metro Trains Melbourne, V-Line, Nutrient Ag Solutions Australia, which is Australia's largest agricultural business, Lavazza Australia, Eric Jones Stair Building, which is a stair building company, PRP Valuers, which is a valuation business from Geelong through to Mount Gambier, and many, many more. Lots of local councils, etc. I've worked with over time. This is our 15th year of being in operation. I basically work with people who are already good at what they do, and the space that I work in through the executive coaching, and in some instances where I work with entire staff in an organisation, is about the exponential difference between being good and fundamentally great. About 20% of my work is in student development. I got involved with student development back in 1994. I'm very, very passionate about it. And I'm delighted that Monsu Caulfield's given me an opportunity to work with you through this series of 8 sessions. So tonight, it's about how to leverage your employability skill development while being a committee member. So it is specific to your roles. What we're going to focus on is the quick introduction. We're going to do a deep dive in each of the big 9 employability skills. My suspicion is that you're going to have some level of awareness of what they are through your studies and possibly through the careers service at the university. But we're going to go a little bit deeper than what you may have gone in the past. And we want you to be able to see how you're relating those skills to your actual roles now, despite the unbelievable difficulties that you would all be experiencing in trying to actually do things for your clubs, right? There's no question it's unbelievably difficult times for that. We want you to get some stories that you can leverage for future interviews. What I've found in my work with students over time, and I'm talking many, many thousands of students that I've worked with over the journey, is a lot of students are doing some really awesome things, both in their clubs and societies at university and also in part-time and volunteer work, but they don't know how to tell the stories about it. And they actually, as a result of that, miss out on some opportunities that they shouldn't miss out on. So I really want to help close that gap for you, and then we'll talk about the next session. So the big picture for employability skills, and I'm not sure it's ever been shown to you like this. Your academic performance matters. There's no question about that. But it's not the end of the world if you started off with maybe not so good academic performance. And I'm aware that sometimes when you're in a club and society and you're on the committee and the workload that comes with that, sometimes your studies drop off a little bit or maybe don't start off so great. Now, ideally, it's about telling the story. So let's say you'd been an average sort of grade student, but you know, you got a year to go and all of a sudden your grades actually get up to that distinction or high level in that last year. That's an important story potentially for future employers, because that's the person they're going to get from an academic point of view and an application point of view, not necessarily the person that might have failed a few subjects or just got a few P for passes and stuff like that. So if you're in that boat where your grades haven't been that great, you're going, oh gosh, I've already ruined it for myself. That's not true. If you can for the remainder of the period, even if it's just one semester, ultimately when you're going for jobs, that's the person you're going to get. So to be able to tell that story and explain it like that may be important for some of you, okay? There is some good that come out of that. Your evidence and understanding of the application of the big 9 employability skills becomes really essential for many, many positions that you'll be going for when you graduate. So actually understanding what the 9 of them are, but then also being able to say, not only do I understand it, but this is how I do it. That's the really high leverage benefit that you get, and you are doing them. You can not be doing these skills when you're actively involved as a committee member for your club, okay? So that's a big thumbs up. Plus, you need to be able to tell the story about how you put these skills into practice. So it's one thing to know them and do them. It's another thing to have some capacity to tell the stories. And we're going to talk about how to do that as well. Collectively, and this is the big picture, this gives you more choices when you're graduating. I can tell you that when students have got all of these green thumbs going, including, as I explained, about the academic performance, when it gets to actually going for jobs, you end up with multiple choices. Now, I will repeat this a lot through this program, but the most successful people in their careers that I work with, and when I say successful, the definition is they are people who love their work and are being paid appropriately for what they love doing. They love their work and they're being paid appropriately, okay? They are people who are working at the intersection of their talent and their passion. People that are working at that intersection, it's actually a pretty big intersection. And one of the beauties of the work that you folk are doing on your clubs and committees, it's actually helping you identify your talents and helps you to identify your passions. Right, Kieran, earlier in the quick chat, when you mentioned that not only are you president of MARTA, but you're still teaching dance. I think I'm hearing that you love dancing. You know, you love the arts, right? And, you know, you're doing some work in that space. You know, Todd Patrick that I mentioned before, he's had a career in it, but he created a business model where he actually has got a school that he gets to teach all the time, run his business, and he's working in that space very successfully, okay, beyond being on stage in his case, all right, as an example of what I'm talking about there. All right, each of the 9 employability skills are interdependent. Does anyone want to explain to me what does that mean? Before we go into the deep dive of the big 9, what does, and feel free to unmute yourself, please, what does being interdependent mean?
That they like rely on each other to work, like they all work together to help you be better.
Yeah, so as for example, we're going to start with communication, and the last one we're going to finish with is teamwork, Kieran. But they're intertwined. So I'm going to go through them individually, but they all feed off each other. On one level, they're all enhancing each other when you understand that's what you're doing, which is going to come to a really smart thing we can do at the end of the session that I'm going to show you regarding your stories. A really high level, powerful thing you can do with far less work than you think to get this massive benefit when you understand these interdependencies, okay? Thanks, Kieran, for unmuting yourself. I appreciate that. All right, so the first one's communication. So I want you to think about what is communication. In the Myro board, I want you, please, as I'm explaining it, quickly just add some sticky notes that you go, I think this might be an example where I've done it in relation to my role on the committee. Okay, so we're thinking about your committee role. And as I'm explaining what communication is, just go and add some sticky notes. So you can add multiple things to a single sticky note, or you can add individual sticky notes for each thing that you're adding. I'm happy for you to leave that in your hands. Excuse me. If you're happy to put your name on the sticky note, that'll make it easy for me to ask questions and stuff in a sec as well as everyone else on the call. So with communication, we mean, this is the deep dive. It means that you're able to speak conversationally at a conversational level in the language of the country in which you are living, because these are global skills. This is really important. They're not just for Australia. These are recognized globally, right? So it's being able to speak conversationally in the first language or whatever country you're living in. Clearly, Australia, that language is
English.
English, okay, thank you. I was trying to see who'd be really quick to unmute themselves there, all right? So public speaking. Now, obviously what I'm doing right now is a clear form of public speaking. And the presentations you get to do for your clubs, when you're out there recruiting for students. Now, at the moment, it's all online, but you know, when you are back on campus, which we're really confident is going to happen from next year, we'll be back out there and you'll be spruiking. That's a form of public speaking. I can promise you folks, in all the corporate work that I do, there is not a single job now where there isn't public speaking required in some form in that job, right? Now, on Friday, we're going to talk about self-talk. And now I find if there's one topic where a lot of people have a lot of negative self-talk, it's public speaking. And what do I mean by there's hardly a job where there isn't people having, where public speaking isn't relevant? What I mean is you might be in an organization where there's 50 people and you're in a meeting, again, when we're allowed to do it, or it could be online now. And whoever the boss is turns and says, so what do you think, What do you think, Kerry? Now, your response is a form of public speaking. If you haven't been practicing it, you're probably not going to be as good as you could be in that context, which means you won't perform as well, which will affect the way people see you as a communicator. So public speaking, and it's not about being the best public speaker in the world. Again, we'll address this sort of topic and we'll relate it to public speaking on Friday's session around self-talk, but public speaking is communication. Appropriate written communication for the channel you are using. Unfortunately, a lot of applications for jobs are via email, or they might be directly through Seek, or they might be directly through, say, LinkedIn. I've seen a lot of students, really smart students who have been getting HDs, use text language in their application. So, and I can see somebody going, really? Well, unfortunately, it's true. So instead of the word you and spelling it Y-O-U, they use text language and use the letter U and all other variations of that. And of course, unfortunately, when a lot of employers literally have, and this is harsh, but they literally have a 15-second rule, or they have 15 seconds to assess, am I going to look further at this application? When the cover letter is written incorrectly for that channel, because it should be written correctly, they will throw it out. Does that make sense? And again, if you've got any questions, use the chat function or unmute yourself. With these nice small numbers, it's pretty easy to do that. So, however, when you're doing promotions and things like that, and you're using various Snapchats or whatever it might be, that communication channel, using that text language is appropriate. So understanding different technologies and how you write and communicate is essential, okay? Definitely in email, choose with email, practice with email, because it still is used a lot for business. Use correct English. In some organizations, they use a lot of Teams and Asana and those sorts of tools, etc. They can get to the point where the team sort of it's become obvious that text language or shorthand language is fine actually in that organization. But you've got to make sure that that's agreed with everyone, all right? Rather than just assume that it's okay. Check first is the rule. Communication means that you comprehend what you're told. You might think, really? That's part of it. Like it really is. Like being able to comprehend, and if you're not sure what something means, being comfortable and vulnerable enough to check and ask questions to get clarity that I understand what I've been told. That's the key there, to make sure that you understand what you've been told. And again, to use multiple channels to communicate important messages. What I recommend for organizations, which would include your clubs, is when you've got important messages to share, use at least 3 channels to get the same message out. What that message looks like on those 3 channels can vary, but use at least 3 channels. Too often when we have important messages, we might say it out loud at a meeting, let's say, but then don't follow up with any other channels. And then we wonder why people didn't understand what we thought they should understand. So I'm just going to pause it there for a sec with the presentation and just have a look inside the Myro board. So we've got presenting ideas, checking on committee members a few times a month. Yeah, reaching out, that's great. Communicating via non-verbal methods. Who wants to talk to that? The yellow one with communicating via non-verbal methods.
I wrote that.
Okay, fantastic.
So basically it was just like you were mentioning, like emails or messages, like you use different kinds of methods to communicate with everyone.
Yeah, which will be little things like nodding, for example, those sorts of messages. Equally, you could say something, I'm really interested in what you've got to tell me. Are you communicating your level of interest if you do that?
Not really.
Well, actually you are. You're communicating, my words are saying one thing, but I'm actually not interested. Does that make sense? I'm really interested in what, no, you're not. Your body language has told me you're not interested. So that's a really important point, Ritu, is that we want to make sure that our body language actually matches what we're saying, particularly when we are back to face-to-face communication. It's a little bit more difficult, obviously, when we're only getting heads and not seeing the rest of the bodies. That's a really important point. Making sure that everyone in the committee understands each other. All right. How do you make sure of that? How do we know on the committee we actually understand each other?
So what I basically do is talk to them individually to make sure that they understood the message that's being told, especially if one of the members missed a meeting. So I'll just double check with them, like, are you sure? Like, do you understand what just went on through the meeting? Are you like in line with everyone else on the goals and all that? Yeah.
Thanks, Elena. Often when we ask people if they understand, even if they don't, what's their most probable answer?
Yes.
They're going to say, yeah. One of the sessions is on high quality conversations, folks. Get along to that session because you're going to learn some gold about how to handle that exact situation, Elena, to actually make sure to the best of your ability that people really do understand and aren't just saying yes. Right, I'm going to teach you some really cool skills and tactics to help with your conversations to significantly enhance the probability that people do understand. So that's not tonight, that's coming, but it's really, really important. Hosting events and panel discussions, absolutely part of communication. Being transparent, reporting, working together with other members and department, absolutely. Over Zoom meetings to relay information. So Zoom's obviously one form of one channel. So tonight, I'm actually using a combination of Zoom, PowerPoint, and Myro Board. So there's 3 channels to communicate the messages tonight. Okay. Plus we've got the chat function inside of Zoom. So we've got multiple ways to get a handle on where we're at. Okay. And as you're doing, please feel free to ask questions at any time. And thank you for unmuting yourselves. So let's move on to the second one. We're going to do the same thing. So this one's creativity and innovation. So move across to that Myro Board as ideas pop into your head, because these are going to help with the stories later on about, I think we've been involved with this. With creativity and innovation skill, there are fundamentally 2 types of innovation. Most people think, in fact, there's only one, but there's actually 2. The first type of innovation is called a disruptive innovation. Now, right when most of you were all getting born, not long afterwards, Apple created the swipe function on our phones, right? They got that swipe function, which completely changed the way a phone worked. And what did it turn a phone from? That was 85% used for phone calls at that point in time. Once Apple beat Samsung and created this swipe functionality and all the apps and everything that came with it, what did the phone turn into, folks? What did it become?
A smartphone.
Oh, what, sorry?
A smartphone where you can use not just to make calls, but to do several things at once.
Yeah, and what is a smartphone really? What is it really? What are you all on right now? It's a computer, right? A smartphone is effectively a portable computer, a tool to communicate, Sadman, absolutely. But it's fundamentally a tool that is actually a computer. The power of these things, you've probably heard this before, but each one of the phones that we've each got in our pockets has got more power than all of the computers that sent human beings to the moon in 1969. That's how much computing power is in these things. So it disrupted everything. It changed the way we worked everywhere. Uber was a disruption for what industry, folks?
Taxis.
Taxis. Airbnb for what other industry?
Hotels, yeah.
That's spot on, right? So when they were first invented, thanks, Kerry, is when they first got invented, they had an impact across the whole world. That's a disruptive innovation. Now, the reality is most of us probably aren't going to be too many times in our lives, if even once, involved in creating a disruptive innovation. But that's actually what most people think innovation is. The second type of innovation becomes critical then, and this is called incremental innovation. This is where you take a concept that already exists in the world, but does not exist in your context. Like, for example, you might not be using it in your club, right? So, for example, just tonight, most of you, Myro Board is brand new to use as a tool with Zoom. Now, if at the end of the session you think, God, that was useful, I could, we could use this in the club when we're having meetings, and then you go and have a meeting and you introduce a Myro Board to that meeting, you've done an incremental innovation, so long as it makes things better. So you might have a part-time job where they do something and engage with people a certain way, and you take that idea and you apply it to your club. You have done an incremental innovation, and therefore you are an innovator. I can promise you, folks, there isn't a single one of the employers I work with that does not say at least they want to recruit people who can innovate. Most people, because they think innovation is just that first definition, therefore don't define themselves as innovators. I'll be very, very surprised, folks, if what you're doing in your clubs over this year, and largely due to the impact of COVID, you've had to innovate doing incremental innovations left, right, and center. I'm very, very confident you have, but you've got to be able to tell that story. Okay. Now, has anyone got a question so far? Okay. So what I want to look at is back into the Myro Board is just have a look at, so we've got brainstorming ideas together. So brainstorming is a function. It would be the innovation always involves action. This is really important. So it's the actions that come from brainstorming that you would then implement would be the incremental innovation. Is that clear? Okay, cool. That's how that one would work. In terms of the recommend videos, books from informal Slack channel, trying new things to check if they work. And particularly once you've tried them and they then do work, so there's an element of trial and error. Some innovations don't become an incremental innovation when you're trialing them and they turn out that they don't work. That's part of the journey. Innovation nearly always, I mean, you're probably aware that with the light bulb, there was 1,000 that were tested before the first one worked. That's typical for innovation, including even some incremental innovations. Sometimes we've got to try stuff, some things don't work. It's the ones that work and we actually use, they're the incremental innovations you want to talk about. Does that make sense? All right, cool. Let's move now to the next section. Oops, wrong one. So number 3, so we'll move across to board number 3 now. You see that they're lined up in 3 rows there. Is initiative and enterprise. This is both seeing opportunities to be helpful. So first you have to see them, and then taking action that is actually helpful without having been asked to do so. So the key is you're the one who can see the opportunity, you then take action, and it is actually helpful. Okay, so that's the key. Just off the top of the head, who's happy to unmute yourself and share just a simple initiative? And often they're little things. That's why I've got 1% there. They're often little things. They don't have to be big things, but because they're little things, we often don't realize that they matter, but they actually do matter. Has anyone got a quick one that you've popped on the board there? At the moment, we haven't got anything added for initiative and enterprise. So for example, there are a number of you from MARTA. Did any of you reach out to someone else that's now on the call and say, hey, did you know this is on? I'm not sure you know, here's the link. Did anyone do that? not just with Marta, but even with if there's other members?
We sent around the link to the registration form through our Facebook chat, but we didn't send out like the link to this. It was just whoever had registered that we thought so. But I guess in response to your question, one of the things that I did when I first came onto the committee, we're still a really young society. Like we've only been around for a few, like 3 or 4 years. So there's not really, or there weren't a lot of processes and like admin sort of things in place. And so when I came on as secretary, like the first thing that I did was organize our Google Drive and make sure that all our documents were well organized and everything was well documented, and then carried that through into this year. So it didn't seem like much at the time, but now hopefully it's helpful for like Kerry and Ritu joining the committee now. They know where everything is and everything's organised.
So that, and again, that shows, Kieran, too, the interdependency, because not only is that initiative an enterprise, it's also an incremental innovation, because the Google Drive single location for all of those documents and forms didn't exist prior to you doing it. So this is, again, some of them. And, you know, again, a lot of it's really simple sort of stuff, and you just do it. It's for a lot of you folk who are on the committee, you're on the committee because you make stuff happen, right? You're sort of action-based people. You like to be involved and you like to make things happen. So a lot of what you do, you're not conscious that it actually is these skills. And that's what I really want to highlight to you tonight. It actually is. And even if they seem little, we're going to talk about the stories towards the end of the session, but they do absolutely matter. Do we get any? So, okay, anyone else got an initiative one that it could even, I know we're focused on clubs and societies tonight, but even if it's just from a part-time job, you know, it could be, you know, when you just do something that it turns out it was really helpful, but the boss didn't ask you to do it, right? But you did it and it turned out it was helpful. It might be you were at a restaurant and you could see that the person washing the dishes was a bit stuck or something, and you quickly jumped in and helped out, right? No one asked you to do it. You could see they needed help. You got your other job done and you didn't stand there doing this, twiddling your thumbs. You got in and helped, all right? A lot of it can be really simple stuff. Okay. So the fourth one is intercultural competence. Every national culture operates by its set of behavioural rules, and arguably, depending on the size of the country and the nation, those cultural rules can have intercultures to them as well. There can be subcultures within the national culture. Obviously, some really large countries like India and China in particular, there are provinces and things like that that have their own sort of culture within the basis of the broader culture. And even around Australia, you got different sets of cultures within the so-called national culture. So every culture operates from a set of behavioural rules. So whenever you're in another country, you acknowledge and respect those behavioural rules. So you always, from an intercultural competence point of view, would bother to find out what the rules are in countries you visit. It might be simple little things about how to greet correctly and how to say goodbye, how to say thank you. Some of those things you would actually learn, and in some cases, obviously learn some of the language to be able to recognize people as part of their culture. And whatever rules are, like who goes through doors first and all of those sorts of things might be some simple things. Who would you acknowledge first in some cultures is important versus other cultures where it doesn't matter. You would go and you would bother to find those things out. And equally, when you're in your own culture, you acknowledge that there actually are different cultures. And when things happen, you would actually engage. So it might be that you're organizing an event and you've got different committee members from different cultures, which I'm assuming is the case based on who's on the call here tonight. We don't just have to assume that things have to be done an Australian way. We can actually ask that if we were looking at this event the way we want to do it from your culture's perspective, how would it work? And we can engage in that conversation. And we still might do it the Australian way, but we've actually learned a bit about other cultures, and or we've done an incremental innovation and brought some of the ideas from the other cultures into the way we do our event. And we do that consciously and deliberately. Have any of you got some examples of intercultural competence that you've consciously been utilizing for your clubs? Does an example jump to mind for any of you? So we've got the green sticky note. We've got the introduction of a diversity and inclusion portfolio onto our committee. So again, it's also, again, an incremental innovation. If that role didn't exist, clearly diversity and inclusion portfolios exist in the world already. But if it didn't exist for your club and you've created that portfolio and you're bringing that perspective in, it's giving that intercultural perspective from a diversity and inclusion perspective. Well done. Whose was that?
That was mine.
Okay, well done. And is this year the first year that that's happened, Kieran?
Yeah, we had the first portfolio join at our AGM in September last year. So first year that we've got everything up and running.
Oh, fabulous. And look, you know, there's an example like that in terms of your future careers. And I appreciate that as president, were you president then as well when that got brought in?
I was secretary at the time, so part of the decision-making group.
Okay, and now gold, that piece is gold. You were part of the decision-making group, because sometimes people might say, well, it wasn't my idea. I was on the committee. It wasn't my idea. So I can't make a claim to that in terms of a potential story. When you're part of a team like a committee is, when the team does something, you can claim your role as a team member in achieving whatever it was. So you don't say it was all me, because that would be inaccurate, but you would say, I was part of the committee in this role and we made the decision. I was part of the decision-making process to, in this case, create a diversity and inclusion portfolio. This is really important for your stories. And one of the benefits of being on a committee is that everything the committee actually creates, so long as you've been an active member, you can claim part of it, right? Be honest about the part you can claim, but you can claim part of it as a team member, all right? It's really, really critical for your stories. And it's a really essential message to be able to get out. Okay, number 5, planning and organisation. So if you go across to the 5th Myro board again, so any of these that pop in your mind, feel free to add to them. So this is your ability to execute, to both create, and execute plans from everything from your club strategic plan, like, you know, maybe it doesn't have a vision and you go through a little process because you learn something at uni about how to do that and you do it, and you got a little vision statement, for example, some values and maybe a mission statement even, but you don't just create the statements, you actually refer them to help you make decisions, and right through to a daily checklist that you might utilize for your role on the club. Okay, you might have this little checklist you use before coming into a meeting, and everything in between is part of what planning and organisation means. It's about understanding that plans are always dynamic. A lot of people are surprised that you might be aware that airline pilots, not that they're getting to fly too much at the moment, but pilots have to submit plans to, say, fly from Melbourne to Sydney. When they're actually flying, the plane itself will spend, according to the research, up to 99% of the time not following the plan. And the reason is because planes are flying in a very dynamic system where there's other planes whose elevation and or their the direction they're going, plus the weather, can cause your plane to have to end up being 1,000 meters higher than it was previously planned to be. And you've got to make that adjustment while you're in the air. You finally get up towards Sydney and there's too many planes on the runway, so you've got to do some circle work before you could land. So you might ask yourself, well, what's the point of plans? I'm going to ask you, what's the point of plans then? If, like with planes, every plane you've been on has probably been off its plan 99% of the time through the flight. What's the point of them?
Make sure that like everyone has the same idea of what's going on and like the criteria and the kind of formats of how to get there.
Yeah, that's right, Kerry. It's the how to get there bit and having that criteria, but also having clarity about where we're going. We may adjust So it's very rare that we end up changing where we decide that we're going to go. But having the plan enables us to make adjustments to keep getting back onto the plan, getting back into where we need to be. It enables us to make those adjustments. Without a plan, you literally could end up anywhere. And that the ultimate goal you're trying to achieve is unlikely to be achieved. So having the plans, understanding their dynamic, enable us to make those adjustments to get back on track, to end up making sure we get to where we want to go to and deliver whatever it is we're trying to deliver. Really, really important. Thanks, Kerry. Time management is part of your planning and organisation skills. So simple little things like turning up tonight on time like you did, folks, is part of what this skill means. Delivering your projects on time when you said you're going to do them. If you've got a paper that you've got to submit for the committee or that you've got to share, you deliver it when you said you're going to deliver it. These are really key aspects of time management. So it's not just about turning up to meetings on time, it's delivering when you said you were going to deliver. Now, is it possible that sometimes things can just be out of your control? That means you can't get done what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it. Is that possible? And so, what would you do under those circumstances? If that happened, that you promised to get something done, something out of your controls coming in, which is stopping you, so you now can't get it done when you said you were going to do. Maybe it's going to be 2 days late. What would you do?
Communicate with whoever you're supposed to be delivering it to as early as you find out, so that they have enough time to adjust things that they need to, or just so that they're aware that it's going to be late.
100%. Nothing more for me to add. That is 100% accurate. Get onto them as early as possible. Let them know. Make whatever adjustments you have to do, but communicate. So again, time management, part of planning an organisation, linked in with the communication employability skill. Okay. And obviously there's lots and lots of examples that you folk are involved with as far as planning an organisation goes. Any events, I assume most of them are online at the moment. So we've got the blue post-it note there at the moment where it says ensure that the workload is spread evenly with one person not handling everything under pressure. That's going to relate to understanding roles and having role clarity, which we're going to talk about in one of the other sessions. I'm assuming, folks, that there's a fair bit more that you could be adding to the board, that you've actually been involved with planning an organisation in some ways with your role as the committee member. So it could be things like usually someone's taking the minutes, right? So that could be anyone here. And I would assume there's some agreement about when those minutes will be distributed after the meeting. And if that's your role and let's say it's a week or it's 3 days, whatever the time frame that's been agreed, if you're delivering those minutes on time as agreed, that's an example of this employability skill in action through your role on the committee. Is anyone acting as a secretary, by the way? No? Okay. Or maybe you got to give them a nudge to get them out on time when they said they were going to. That's a possibility too, of course. All right. If you've got any questions, please ask them. If you go, I think I understand this, but I'm not 100% sure, or I think I've got this example, but I'm not 100% sure, please feel free to either add it as a sticky note or just unmute yourself, and I'm more than happy to work through with you if it is or it isn't, okay? Number 6 is problem identifying and solution. So that ranges from solving really big problems as to how to engage with club members during COVID, which no doubt you're all struggling with, and maybe coming up with some great innovations as to how you're doing that, to solving Sadman's problem that he had with technology and his internet dropping out tonight and getting himself back on, and then communicating with me again, the interdependencies. Gary, can you give me the Myro Board link again, please? Great example of Sadman solving a quick problem, a low-level problem, just to get back into the call. So they're everything in between. But they do involve taking action. So as Sadman did, he took action, got himself back into the room, and he also took action to communicate with me to let me know what had been going on with him, that his internet had dropped out. Okay, really great communication involving problem solving at the same time. This also includes the lessons you've learned and how you've improved over time. So, for example, you might be on your committee and you've discovered that when we do the session on high quality conversations, you're probably all going to learn, gosh, there's things about how I speak with people. This is actually talking, oral conversation, that could have been a lot better than it's been. And that session, you're going to walk away with some really clear tactics as to how to improve it. Don't beat yourself up for it, you know, not being that great in the past, because you just didn't know, right? It's about improving over time and really just getting better and noticing how you get better. One of the challenges of being on a club for a lot of people is they're only in the club for maybe a year, and they sort of leave when they start mastering the skills required to be on the club. And that's where obviously having people like yourself, Kieran, that have rolled over at least 1 year into a second year is so important for so many clubs to have at least a number of committee members at least do those 2 years. And knowing that too, for those of you that are in that situation, is, you know, part of problem identification and solution is the handover from one committee to the next. Is that fair? That's often a really big challenge for clubs, is that we have this club going really, really well, but then we discover with a month to go that pretty much all of them aren't going to be there next year. And we go scrambling for a new committee, and then all the new committees are left with virtually no handover, and they've got to virtually on many levels start again. Some of the nods on the calls, so this is sounding somewhat familiar. I have been around a little while, right? Okay. So what if we were able to identify that earlier and recognize, hey, folks, there's a high probability none of us are going to be here next year. It's August. What are we doing to actually start bringing some people in now that don't actually have to be on the committee necessarily? We don't have to go through a special general meeting to vote them in or anything, but we could invite them in as guests because we actually are going to be wanting to expose them to how it works. And if committee passes a resolution to allow that to happen, that's fine. We can do stuff like that. Again, we're innovating once again. Just want to check the Myro board again. So anyone? So there's been no problem so far that anyone has provided a solution to in your clubs. Not even one so far that someone would add. I think there may have been.
The one that I was going to put on, you just explained perfectly.
So transition of club members, committee membership.
Committee members, yeah.
Something like that, 1 year to the next, all right? You know, that, and look, the beauty of a problem like that, Kieran, is it's actually quite a strategic problem. It's actually quite a big problem. And the fact that you might not perfect it, but again, when it comes to, hey, I've dealt with this sort of stuff, and our committee was only this big, or our club was only this big, or it was this big, doesn't matter. When you're able to talk like that about the things that you tried to do, that's really attractive for prospective employers in the future, because the scale might be still this big in reality for the club, but in the real world, this stuff goes on all the time. Like, you know, having succession plans and stuff for people in organizations is a real issue. You've sort of dealt with that when you're really young as a committee member or as a president in this instance, okay? Really good example, thank you. All right, professionalism. Professionalism is dependent upon the profession, right? So it is unique to the profession. And so then the question is, how do you know what the professional standards are for my profession? So normally you need to reach out to the professional associations associated with that profession. So the accounting profession and the dance profession are going to have different standards as to what professional means. They will still define it, however. They will still have they'll have some clarity about what it means to be professional in this industry. If you think of your club or society, there may be national-based associations to which you're connected with through your club. Is that accurate for some of you? Or even international, like ASEC, for example, You've got that international organization that you're part of. Golden Key has an international association that's part of. So those international groups inform what it means to be professional in a club on campus in Australia for that particular type of club. Does that make sense? So it's about reaching out and getting some clarity about what they would be. So that's generally how we find out, is through those professional associations or those larger associations that we're associated with, which in your case could be related to the category that your club fits into, and or it could be in relation to national student associations potentially as well, to get some of that information. What I want to highlight here as a story is that when I was back at Monsu Caulfield, I was actually the senior coach of the Monash Griffins Australian Football Rules Club for 4 seasons. And that club had only been formed in 1991. And I was the senior coach from 1996 to 1999. I appreciate for many of you might not have been born then. So it's a long time ago. In 1999, in fact, in May of 1999, unfortunately, one of our players got a broken neck in the reserves game. So there's the seniors, the top team, and then the second team, and he broke his neck. Now, despite the fact that we were an amateur football club, so no one got paid, we still believed and set ourselves up with the committee, and I reported into the president, that we would be as professional a club that as we could be for our standard. So when that player broke his neck, that professionalism came to the surface because we knew where the keys were to allow the ambulance to come onto the field, because there's a gate that's locked. Now, if we were unprofessional, we wouldn't have known where those keys were, and the ambulance would not have been able to get on the field. And as it turns out, Jason, his name is, Jason became an incomplete quadriplegic, and as a result, he can actually walk. He spent a year in hospital and he can walk because he had a little slither of his spinal cord that wasn't damaged. If, however, he had been inappropriately moved when he got first injured, so both our first aid and the knowledge of where that key was to let the ambulance get out to him, there's every probability that that little slither would have been damaged and he never would have walked. He never would have ended up being the biological father he's been. He never would have ended up probably running the business that he now runs, etc., etc., etc. I'm still very close with Jason, and I have his permission to share his story. But that's where professionalism can kick in. We might only be a small organization, but we know the little things that might one day matter. And in this case, it was a significant injury, which we'd never imagined in the wildest dreams would happen. It's very, very rare, in fact, for that injury to happen, but it did. And our professionalism actually helped contribute to the best outcome possible for a very bad situation. Does that make sense? Okay. Next is teamwork. Pretty straightforward. It's working and collaborating with people to achieve desired results. It's ensuring your team members are clear about what you're trying to achieve. So we're all on the same page, which is that conversation that Alina shared with us a little bit earlier, and clear about what their role is in achieving that success. And it's about utilizing the strengths and as well as all of the, I'll just go back there. Sorry for a sec. I just accidentally moved this. It's about making sure that we use their success and diversity to improve and create the success that the club wants. Recognizing and celebrating the contribution of team members is really important. As you heard me say at the start of today, for tonight's session, I'm part of the team with Kieran. Kieran can't be here tonight, but without his work, we wouldn't be here. So I recognize his contribution at the start of the session, just as a little simple example. For tools and technology, it's everything from using a physical whiteboard to artificial intelligence that you might be accessing for data to help you do what your club needs to do with your club members. It usually involves being able to learn quickly. So tonight you demonstrated that you could learn quickly to be able to use the Myro Board. So use of tools and technology is your ability. And when it comes to job hunting, you want to be able to highlight how, okay, I might not know the technical platform that you're using in your company, but I'm a quick learner when it comes to tools and technology. For example, when I was on the club committee, we learned this, and we learned this. on top of all the other things that you've learned over time. So that's how you would leverage your tools and the technology. Right, now that we've explained all 9 employability skills, is anyone with a question? All good? All right, you've got to be able to tell your story. So there's fundamentally 3 storytelling techniques, which you've got some space on the 3 Myro boards next to those 9 employability skills. The first one is called the STAR technique. Recruiters are taught to listen for this structure in your stories. So you first select your employability skill. Let's say it's communication. The situation might be we were trying to host an online event for our named club, right? The task was we wanted to have 50 people involved, and my role was to do A, B, or C. Then the actions bit. Just hands up, show of hands. If you're on screen, or just use the chat function. Who doesn't really like selling themselves? So if it comes to you, actually have to sell yourself. So just Kieran and Nick, Ritu, thanks, Kerry. Okay. What do you like? You don't like selling yourself too much either. So sometimes we have to, we feel under pressure to sell yourself. So given most of you said you don't like selling yourself, the beauty with these 3 storytelling techniques is you don't have to sell yourself. All you got to do is tell the true story using these 3 structures. And it's the actions bit where you tell people what you did. This is what I did. Okay. So the situation might be a team thing. The task might even be a team thing or a committee thing in your case. The actions is what you did to contribute to the team. And the results, of course, is usually the team outcome again. This was the outcome here that we got for the team. So that's situation, tasks, action, results. Circumstances, action, results is called the CAR technique. All circumstances mean is situation and task are put together. And that was the circumstance. So what we defined earlier as situation and task comes together and forms the circumstance. All right. So sometimes they'll ask you to, they'll actually, in the bigger organizations now, they'll even tell you, we want to hear your story in a CAR technique. They'll say that, or they might send that in the information to you. And the last version is problem, action, results, which is specific to problem solving, obviously. Okay. So you do not need to sell yourself. You don't have, excuse me, you don't have to worry about that. All you need to do is tell your story, right? What I'd like you to do is just pick one of the 9 employability skills, please. This is worth doing. I appreciate we're just a little bit over time. Pick any one of the 9 and then choose any one of the 3 storytelling techniques. So you might want to use one of the examples you've already put on one of the Myro boards as your catalyst for your story. And then if you grab a sticky note to either the STAR, the CAR, or the PAR technique, start off with the name of the employability skill, or just even the number. That might be easier. So just go #1, #2, for example, depending on which employability skill it is. And then see if you just in dot point form, you can just record a story. I'll just give you a couple of minutes. This is really worth doing. A personal story for you that reflects your ability to actually put into practice one of the employability skills. And while you're doing that, feel free to ask me a question or seek some clarity. So we've got a communication, we've got a creativity and innovation story getting added at the moment, which is terrific. We've got a problem identification and solution story getting added. And again, folks, what's really important is they don't have to be like seemingly amazing stories. They're just stuff you did. Right? Sometimes we overcook worrying about the impact of the story. What we want to demonstrate is that we understand what the skill is and we understand what it's like to put the skill into action. And so they don't have to be big stories. They can be those little 1%ers that I highlighted earlier. And again, you got your 3 structures. So you don't have to use all 3. So we've got a professional.
Just a question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go for it.
Could you explain the CAR storytelling technique again?
Yeah. So with situation and task to start technique, Ritu, you've got, this is the situation. So I was on this, I was on my club, and the task was we were trying to organize an online event for X. The circumstances is the situation task just said the same way. So I was on this club, so the words are virtually exactly the same. That's why I want to teach you this. And I'm really glad you asked the question, because they're actually exactly the same. It's just that sometimes employers might ask you to use the CAR technique, and all it is a situation task put together. So you just say it exactly as if you were saying a star story, right? It's just that if you get that communicated to, it's, for some of you, it could throw you, right? You know, what do you mean by the circumstance, right? What it means is, okay, I was on the club, this was my role, and we were doing this online event for X number of people. You would say exactly the same words.
Okay, thank you.
I've just separated it because it's a little confusing, but they could ask you or send you some communication to prepare your stories using any one of those 3 techniques. Great question. Love it. Okay, so we're getting some stories there. This is really cool. So remember, the action part is what you personally did. Now, while you're still just finishing off those stories, is it possible? Is it possible, do you think, that you could have an example of a story where the first time around the result wasn't good, but because it wasn't good, you learned something really powerful that you then applied the next time you came across this situation, and the outcome was awesome? Is that possible, do you think? Those stories are really gold, because they're demonstrating learning over time. So they're like a double cycle story. The situation was this, the task was this, my actions were this, the result was it didn't work. But what I learned was, so the next time it happened, this is what I did. Different actions, amazing outcome. So fail stories can be used in interviews, providing there's a second cycle to the story and the outcome shows a great outcome. Does that make sense? They are unbelievably powerful stories, right? When you've got them, they are really, really powerful stories that when you can use that double cycle story, do it. All right. You've got your stories on the boards there that you're just wrapping up there. At the very bottom of the story, I want you to add a number, please. You've written your story based on one of the 9 employability skills. Of the other 8 available employability skills, how many of them could you tell the same story, but just change the perspective to one of the other employability skills? So you wrote a communication story, but could that also be told the same story, but told from the perspective of teamwork, for example, or innovation, or problem identification and solution, or tools and technology? What number of the other available 8 do you reckon you could tell your story from? And just add that to your sticky note, please, at the very bottom. And I'm not sure if you all saw that Sadman had to leave, folks. Okay, 8 is one of them. So all 8, cool. This is that high piece of leverage I mentioned before. Okay, we've got 2 for our number 6 story. We've got 5 for our number 7 story, 8 for our number 2 story, again on the STAR technique. And on the green, the problem identification and solution story. How many other ways do you think you could tell that same story? And sometimes it might only be one, for example, but other times it might be all 8. But this is the kicker. Let's just say the average was 5, right? You write a story, there's 5 other ways you could tell that story. So there's 9 employability skills and 5 ways we could tell each of those stories, or actually 6 because you include the first way, right? What's 9 times 6? Who's quick in the chat function? 9 times 6.
54.
Thank you. Very good. All right. So now think of this. If you've only throughout your journey, and this is I really want to encourage you to do this. Keep a record of your best story for each of the 9 employability skills. And many of them are going to come from your involvement in the clubs. They won't all have to come from your club involvement though, and being on the committee, but many of them will. And over time, if you get a better one for communication, replace it. But just have 9 stories ready to go for when you go job hunting. When you get to the interviews, if you know that on average, you could tell each one of those 9 stories 6 different ways, you've actually got 56 versions of real, true stories that cover these big 9 employability skills. What's your confidence level going into that interview? High, medium, or low, folks? What's it going to be? Show me with your hands. It's going to be up there. This absolutely works. I can promise you this works. All you have to do, and it only took you a couple of minutes to even record one story now. It's actually not much work, but your awareness of what the employability skills, bothering to actually keep a record of them somewhere over time, replace them with better ones as they come in. The stress associated with interviews drops dramatically. I can promise you, when you get to the interview stage for your first jobs, they already believe you can do the technical side of the job. What they're actually testing is, are you going to fit in our culture and our organization? And are you someone who's going to learn with us? That's what they want to know, which is why they do their behavioral interviewing, focusing on these big 9 employability skills. When you've got around 54 versions of real true stories, lots of little 1%ers, they add up to a hell of a lot when it comes to an interview. And all you got to do is listen to their questions, pick your employability skills. So I'd written that one for communication, but that one's going to be the best one to tell from a problem-solving perspective today with this interview. So I'm going to tell that communication story from a problem-solving perspective. And it'll just reel off your tongue, and you won't have to worry about selling yourself because it's true and it's real. You just got to tell the story following the structure. Does that make sense? Okay, this is the key benefit to being on your clubs and societies committees. This is absolutely the key benefit for you, which is why I've got that key on that slide for you. Okay, it's literally the key holder to the rest of the world for you, for your careers. So the next session is on Friday from 1 p.m. We'll stick better to the hour this time around. I'd spend a little bit of time just teaching you how to get around things. If you're going to come along, so it's discover the power of constructive self-talk and how to foster it among your committee members. This is a really, really awesome self tool to learn, but also amazing leadership tool to learn in regard to your working with other people. Because the last couple of things about those big 9 employability skills is they are actually collectively about your leadership development and your service excellence, your customer service understanding. They all work interdependently to help those 2 key categories as well. If any of you use LinkedIn, please feel free to reach out and connect with me. So you don't have to follow. I'm more than happy for you to connect with me. And I look forward to having the opportunity to work with you all again. And thank you for coming along tonight. Please let Kieran know your thoughts on how useful tonight's been for you. I'll just stop the recording right now.